All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack a truly massive macroeconomic shift. We're looking at data from the World Bank and China's National Bureau of Statistics today, and we're going to dig into the mechanics, the policies, and the hard data behind what's widely recognized as the largest poverty reduction in human history.
Think about the sheer contrast here for a second, because it really tells an incredible story. Back in 1981, the extreme poverty rate sat at a staggering 88.1%. But over the next 4 decades, that rate steadily plummeted, eventually dropping to just 0.7% by 2020. We're talking about the fundamental transformation of a nation's entire socioeconomic fabric, all achieved in just 40 years.
So what does that percentage drop actually look like in human terms? Well, it translates to over 800 million people. To put that massive demographic shift into perspective, that's more than double the entire population of the United States, all lifted above the extreme poverty line within a single generation's lifetime.
Now, to really understand the mechanics behind this shift, we're going to follow a 5-part agenda today. First, the scale of change. Second, the broad macroeconomic levers. Third, the targeted approach. Fourth, the core systemic enablers. And finally, the ultimate takeaway. Poverty is not inevitable.
Okay, Part 1. The scale of change.
The source material gives us this really comprehensive blueprint, basically mapping out how this poverty reduction was achieved starting back in 1978. There are obviously a lot of moving parts here, everything from agricultural reforms to rapid urbanization, so we're going to break these key factors down step by step to clearly see the framework.
Here's the real kicker. This single country's efforts didn't just reshape their own demographics, they actually altered the global trajectory. They accounted for more than 70% of the total global poverty reduction during this period. And because of this incredibly accelerated pace, they hit the United Nations 2030 agenda a full decade ahead of schedule. Truly amazing.
Moving on to Part 2. Broad macroeconomic levers.
So where did it all start? The initial spark came in 1978 with some major market-oriented shifts designed to unleash economic growth. To bring in capital, they set up special economic zones to draw in foreign investment and expertise. Meanwhile, to boost things domestically, they rolled out the household responsibility system. By giving farmers direct control and actual incentives, agricultural output, and by extension, rural incomes, absolutely skyrocketed.
But you really can't have that kind of growth without serious infrastructure. We're talking massive investments in rural irrigation, local roads and schools, paired with a nationwide boom in highways, railways, ports, and power grids. Because this new infrastructure suddenly connected remote areas to huge new markets, hundreds of millions of people packed up and moved to cities in this unprecedented wave of urbanization to find better jobs and healthcare.
At the exact same time, they were pouring resources into human capital. Achieving universal basic education and massively expanding higher ed built up a highly skilled workforce. This completely fueled an export-oriented manufacturing boom, creating hundreds of millions of jobs. And to make sure people didn't just slip right back into poverty, they introduced robust social security systems, expanded healthcare, pensions, and minimum living assistance acted as a vital safety net.
All right, Part 3. The targeted approach.
Around 2013, the strategy really shifted gears from those macro policies to highly targeted poverty alleviation. First, they actually identified poor households individually, literally one by one. Second, instead of a generic blanket policy, they delivered precise, tailored assistance designed to fix a specific family's hurdles. And third, they maintained strict accountability at the household level just to make sure the program was actually working.
So instead of just handing out generic aid, specific families received precise resources. For immediate needs, that meant safe housing, basic healthcare, and sometimes even relocating people out of completely inhospitable regions. For the long haul, families got job training, employment assistance, and dedicated education support for their kids. Zooming out just a bit to the community level, this targeted approach meant paving roads and bringing clean water, reliable power, and crucial internet access right to their doorsteps.
And the direct result of this hyper-focused micro-level intervention was highly measurable. The data shows that by the end of 2020, all 98.99 million remaining rural poor people, as measured under their current standard, had been successfully lifted above the poverty line. That effectively closed the final gap in this massive eradication campaign.
Which brings us to Part 4, Core Systemic Enablers.
So, what was the foundational engine running all of this?
Well, it relied heavily on sustained economic growth. From 1978 to 2012, GDP growth averaged a staggering 9.2%, creating the sheer economic capital needed to fund these poverty initiatives. According to the source, this was all facilitated by a stable political environment which allowed for consistent, long-term planning and policy execution spanning across multiple decades.
On the execution side, it required incredibly tight coordination from the central government all the way down to local villages. They also aggressively integrated new technology, like using mobile internet and e-commerce to allow remote farmers to sell their crops directly to broader markets. But ultimately, the source highlights that the absolute key to success was the hard work of the people and their overwhelming aspiration to build a better future.
And finally, Part 5, Poverty is not inevitable.
Looking back at 4 decades of data and strategy, the source material arrives at a really clear, powerful conclusion. China's experience suggests that with the right mix of policies, leadership, and public effort, poverty is a completely conquerable condition. It's not just some unchangeable fact of nature. It's not inevitable. It can be overcome.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final question to chew on. Looking at this incredible roadmap, from the sweeping macroeconomic reforms to those hyper-targeted household interventions, which of these strategies could be adapted right now to accelerate the broader global fight against extreme poverty? Thanks so much for exploring this vital topic with me today.